Some of the 302s. And when you don't show up at a meeting that we request behind closed doors, kind of lose that opportunity.
If I could,
Now we're going to recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Agent Herring, did the FBI interview the sender of all emails that contain classified information?
you know, I don't know the answer to that question, only because I'm a Ledge Affairs guy. I was on the investigative team.
Can you find out? You would agree with me it'd be important. I mean, you'd want to interview the person who sent the classified information, right?
Certainly.
Because the recipient thought the C was just the third letter in the alphabet. You might be curious whether or not the sender also was clueless in the way he or she viewed classified information, would you not?
That would be a logical investigative step.
Can you find out whether or not you interviewed the sender of all emails that contain classified information?
Certainly.
Do you know if the sender of any of the classified emails knew that the information was classified at the time?
I don't personally know that. I wasn't a part of the investigative team. I'm sure that.
Can you find out?
Certainly.
Can you find out for me?
Yes, sir.
There are folks wondering how information gets from a classified source into an email. Did your investigation shed any light on how classified information could get from a classified system into an unclassified email to even be sent? I'm not even talking about the receiving of it, I'm talking about the sending of it.
I'm sure they did look at that. That would be sort of a logical question you would ask as an investigator in a case like this.
That's what I thought.
But in my legislative sort of affairs capacity, I just don't have that kind of visibility.
Well, don't sell yourself short. You used to be an agent, right? Still an agent, right? So you know what you're doing. Did the FBI grant immunity to anyone during the course of its investigation?
For immunity questions, I'd have to defer to the Department of Justice for that. It wouldn't be an agent who would grant that kind of thing.
Did the Bureau recommend the granting of immunity?
I do not know.
Do you know whether the Department of Justice granted immunity to any witnesses?
I know I saw some articles last week, but that's the extent of it.
Well, surely you got better sources than the media for that, don't you? You can ask the guy sitting 2 people down from you.
I would have to defer to the Department of Justice, sir.
Do you know whether any witnesses asserted any privileges while they were being interviewed?
I don't know.
But the Bureau would know that, right? Because they would have asserted the privilege while you were in there.
I'm sorry?
The Bureau would know that, right? Because that privilege would have been asserted perhaps while you were in there conducting the interview.
What kind of privilege are you talking about, like attorney-client privilege?
Oh, there are a bunch of privileges. There's priest-penitent. I'm guessing that one didn't come up. There's doctor-patient. I'm guessing that one didn't come up. There's the Fifth Amendment privilege against incrimination. That one might have come up. Attorney-client privilege, again, there have been media reports that one came up.
Sir, I just don't know the answer to those questions.
Have you ever had the attorney-client privilege come up during any of your investigations?
Certainly.
Who does the privilege belong to?
The client.
So the client can waive it, right?
Can.
You understand why Congress might want to know whether or not the attorney-client privilege was waived and who the client was?
I can certainly imagine.
Yeah, me too. That's why we want to see the file, Agent. I mean, you say it's unprecedented. Mr. Cummings used to be a criminal defense attorney. He got to see all your 302s. Ken Buck used to be an assistant United States attorney. He got to see all your 302s. Probation officers get to see all your 302s. Why can't Congress?
Sir, I think we have tried to provide the information in a way that is understandable. I think the investigative summary tells kind of the story, and I do think that the 302s that we provided are the important ones.
Well, let me ask you this. If those summaries were all anyone ever needed, why don't you just introduce those in trial? Why actually call the witness?
Well, certainly we actually trying to make your life a little bit easier in the light of the
But see, I don't want my life being made easier. I don't want that. I want to know what was said in the 302s. Because the 302 is itself a summary of an interview, right? It's not a verbatim transcript.
That's correct.
So you have given me the summary of an interview. And I'm not asking for a verbatim transcript because you don't have one.
Certainly.
I'm just asking for the 302. So I don't have to read your summary. I may read the 302 differently from the way you read it. So why not?
So I think we've given you the relevant ones as we've
relevant according to whom? I am telling you, I don't think you've given me all the relevant 302s.
Well, the remainder of the 302s will come out through the FOIA process.
But since when did Congress have to go through FOIA
Correct.
to obtain 302s from an investigation that's not even resulting in any prosecutions that your boss has already said is over? Since when did we have to go through FOIA?
So I think that the 302s we have provided, I think that we made a principled decision about what to provide. It was certainly made at the highest levels of my agency.
All right, I'm out of time. That's what that knocking sounds. I'm just going to say with all due respect, you don't get to decide what we think is relevant. And I do say that respectfully. The defense attorneys get it all. I think Congress ought to get it all. Mr. Speaker, I'll withdraw my point of order and rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The reservation is withdrawn and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk for just a moment as colleagues, not as Republicans or Democrats, not as members of the majority or the minority, but colleagues who are blessed to serve in the United States House of Representatives, the People's House, with all the tradition, with all the history, with all the laws that have been passed, with all the lives that have been impacted. I want us to talk as colleagues because our foundational document gave us, as the House, unique powers and responsibilities. We run every 2 years because they intended for us to be closest to the people. The President was given different duties and powers. The President was given the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is what does that mean to you? That the laws be faithfully executed. We know the President can veto a bill for any reason or no reason. We know the President can refuse to defend the constitutionality of a statute, even one that he signs into law. We know the President can issue pardons for violations of the very laws that we pass. And we know that the President has prosecutorial discretion as evidenced and used through his U.S. attorneys. Mr. Speaker, that is a lot of power. What are we to do when that amount of power is not enough? What are we to do when this President or any President decides to selectively enforce a portion of a law and ignore other portions of that law? What do we do, Mr. Speaker, regardless of motivation, when a president nullifies our vote by failing to faithfully execute the law? How do we explain waivers and exemptions and delays in a bill passed by Congress and affirmed by the United States Supreme Court? How do we explain away a refusal to enforce mandatory minimums that were passed by Congress and affirmed by the Supreme Court? And why pursue, Mr. Speaker, immigration reform if presidents can turn off the very provisions that we pass? You know, in the oath that brand new citizens take, it contains 6 different references to the law. If it's good enough for us to ask brand new citizens to affirm their devotion to the law, is it too much to ask that the president do the same? If a president can change some laws, can he change all laws? Can he change election laws? Can he change discrimination laws? Are there any laws under your theory that he actually has to enforce? What is our recourse, Mr. Speaker? What is our remedy? Some would argue the framers gave us the power of the purse and the power of impeachment, but Mr. Speaker, those are punishments, those are not remedies. What is the remedy if we want the executive to enforce our work? This bill simply gives us standing when our votes are nullified. This bill allows us to petition the judicial branch for an order requiring the executive branch to faithfully execute the law. Mr. Speaker, we are not held in high public esteem right now. maybe members of Congress would be respected more if we respected ourselves enough to require that when we pass something, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we had a firmly rooted expectation that when we pass something as law, it be treated as law. Maybe we would be more respected if we put down party labels and a desire to keep or retain or acquire gavels and picked up the history, the tradition, and the honor of this, the people's house. Mr. Speaker, the House of Representatives does not exist to pass suggestions. We do not exist to pass ideas. We make law. And while you are free to stand and clap when any president comes into this hallowed chamber and promises to do it with or without you, I will never stand and clap when any president, no matter whether he's your party or mine, promises to make us a constitutional anomaly and an afterthought. We make law.
Expired.
To this story in the Times?
Well, I've been in a classified skiff with Director Pompeo for the last 2 hours, Martha, so I'm catching up a little bit. I read the story. Obviously, I want to see the memo. Obviously, I want to talk to Director Comey to determine how contemporaneous his recording of the conversation was, but also importantly, not just what was said, but what did Director Comey hear? How did he take it? And that can only be done, with all due respect to the New York Times, that can only be done by looking at the memo and talking to Director Comey.
Yeah, the New York Times in this report does not have the memo in their hands. It was read to them over the phone. So that in and of itself, you know, as you point out, it's very difficult to get the context if you can't read the whole thing.
Well, if you go back to criminal procedure, which is my background, there's a doctrine called the rule of completeness. Whenever part of a document is introduced, you got to be able to look at the entire document. Your viewers and my fellow citizens deserve to see the entire context of whatever conversation may or may not have taken place. And quite frankly, Director Comey deserves an opportunity to come tell us how he heard it, what he heard, how pervasive it was, and how much of the conversation that segment consumed. So we have a story. There's a reason newspaper articles are not admissible in any courtroom in the United States. I'm not knocking the reporter. The reporter does good work. But we're a long ways from a conviction, the fact that we simply have a headline in the New York Times.
So in terms of the calls for a special prosecutor, an independent prosecutor, this is going to only fuel those. Do you think there's any reason to go that route at this point?
I have been resistant in the past, but I've been open-minded. Special counsel is only appropriate if there's an allegation of a crime, and there are several crimes potentially at play here. The hacking of the DNC is a crime. I don't hear people talking about that much. The dissemination of classified information is a crime. General Flynn's comments to the FBI may or may not constitute a false statement to a law enforcement official. And I've heard allegations that this rises to the level of obstruction of justice. So you do have a sufficient evidentiary basis for a crime. But the other half of the equation is whether or not the Department of Justice or any of the 94 U.S. attorneys can do the job themselves. And I have not been persuaded that all 94 U.S. attorneys in our country, many of whom are women and men who have nothing to do with politics, are incapable of fairly adjudicating this fact pattern.
All right, one last question on this, then I want to get to the next subject with you. If James Comey believed that what the president said to him was an effort to obstruct justice, you know, to get him to table this investigation of Mike Flynn, would he be obligated to let the Department of Justice know right away?
I don't think so. I'm probably in a minority here. I don't think Director Comey reported President Obama the 4 different times he prejudged the outcome of an investigation. And there were 4 different times. Director Comey has not been afraid in the past to say no to presidents and attorney generals. He did it when he was with the Department of Justice. I think if he felt like this was an effort to influence him, he knows exactly what to do.
Yeah.
But I won't know that until I have a chance to ask him.
All right. One thing we're left with still in all of this is an empty seat at the head of the FBI, and your name was on that short list. You asked for it to be taken off. Why? Why do you think you're not the right person for that job?
I think the country can do better than me, quite frankly. I did have 20 years in a courtroom, Martha. That's the best job I've ever had. But the reality is, in this current political environment, I am known more for being asked to chair one committee than I am the 20 years I spent in a courtroom. And my first rule of friendship is don't ask friends to do things that are not in their best interest. And the Senate confirmation process would be dreadful and it'd be miserable. And quite frankly, I think the country deserves a woman or a man who is devoid of political taint. And whether I like it or not, whether I wish I could wash it off or not, I have been in politics for 6 years. I think I could be fair, but I don't know that I could get the job, and I don't know that I could convince a sufficient number of my fellow citizens that I would be fair. And quite frankly, they deserve an FBI director that is above reproach.
We're just learning that Jason Chaffetz is saying, the congressman is saying that he has a subpoena pen hanging over this memo, and he would like to see it. Any reaction to that?
I don't know that he would have to subpoena it. I thought he was recuperating from surgery. I'm glad he's doing better. And he found a subpoena pen. I don't know that you would need to subpoena this memo. If it was read to the New York Times, I would certainly hope the FBI would read it to members of Congress. So hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I want to go back a little further in the Jim Comey story. You put out a statement when he was fired saying that he had a very tough job and access to the facts that perhaps the rest of us did not, is the way that you put it. A lot of people have said that his performance on July 5th, when he came out and said, we have all this evidence, extreme carelessness on the part of Hillary Clinton, and yet we are not going to prosecute her. Was that news conference enough in and of itself to let him go, do you think?
7, 6, 5, 4.
No, and I think when history knows the full fact pattern that led Director Comey to have that July news conference, I think what your viewers know is a meeting on the tarmac between the spouse of a suspect, or the target of an investigation, the Attorney General. What your viewers don't know, Martha, and what Jim Comey frankly can't tell them because it's classified, and I can't tell them because it's classified, there were a lot of other reasons that Jim Comey decided to take that decision upon himself. And I think history, and I've had plenty of differences with Jim Comey, I want to be really clear about that, lots of them. But I think history is going to be much kinder to Jim Comey in that July press conference than the Democrats were when he had it. I think he had access to information that, because he is a stand-up guy and he's not going to disseminate classified information, although God knows everybody else is, he's not going to do it, even if it casts him in a negative light. So all your viewers see is this meeting on the tarmac. Jim Comey had access to additional information that I am convinced left him with no other choice than to make the decision he made in July.
So you're saying he had no choice? There was pressure on him to not prosecute Hillary Clinton? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I think he had access to information and he wanted to safeguard the integrity of the investigation and the integrity of the process. And I probably ought to just leave it right there. But no, I'm not talking about pressure. I don't think the guy feels pressure. I think he wanted the public to have confidence in the investigation and the outcome. Even though I disagreed with the outcome, he wanted you to have confidence in the process. He had access to information that your viewers don't have, and they may not ever have because it is classified. But trust me when I tell you this, Martha, I know what it was. And I have been a critic of Jim Comey in the past. But he made the only decision he could have made with respect to appropriating that decision away from the Department of Justice and making the decision himself. And history will be a hell of a lot kinder to him than the Democrats were at the time.
I only take away from that you're suggesting that there were more entanglements between the Clintons and perhaps the Justice Department than everyone understands.
You're very perceptive.
Okay. Thank you. Trey Gowdy.
Yes, ma'am.
Always good to see you, sir. We'll dig for more on that later. Good to see you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.